Emma, welcome again to the show.
Thank you. See,
Uh,
the second time is more fun.
Always. So we did this once before. Nobody ever got to saw it because the file mysteriously disappeared. But I'm anticipating that we have a second conversation, which went really well the first time, to be even better this go round.
Yeah, exactly. We've had a practice round now, so now we're pros.
100%. Now, you and I are both in tech, and we follow each other on social, and we've been seeing how fast everybody is working. You work with a multitude of clients. What are you seeing right now?
I feel like everybody that I'm talking to in my personal life and professional life is feeling a little bit of a pinch lately, and that there is a lot of overwhelming feelings going on. And I think that's also kind of tied to, I actually saw someone calling it the great resignation today, of people switching positions and people really looking for a different level of balance. And I'm sure plenty of people are, leaving jobs for the same reasons that they have for years and years. But I think that we're starting to see almost like a work from home or this hybrid work fatigue, and I think it's universal to age and job role. I mean, again, everyone I talk to seems to be feeling that pinch right now.
I've been working from home for almost 5 years, and I've loved it the entire time. But when COVID hit and I and my coworkers turned on the gas even higher and just really accelerated to fit that model, it's almost like that's become the new normal. And before, I would get really irritated. I would go into the office and there would be all the hellos, and it would be a half an hour before I sat down. And then I would get started working, and people would walk into the office and interrupt the workflow. There would be the, hey, let's go out to lunch thing, and that would eat up the time. And I felt so like appreciative of working from home and how much more I got done. But it seems that this pace that's changed since COVID hit and we're all working from home, it's burning people out. There was like this initial, oh, I get to wear my pajamas and, walk with the dog. But more and more people are realizing, no, 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 it's just a work thing.
Mhm.
What are you seeing?
I agree with that sentiment. And I think when COVID initially hit, and I don't want to say there isn't patience for life to get in the way of working at this point. But when COVID first hit and everybody was home with their kids and you were working, I mean, there was a lot of flexibility and a lot of understanding of a kid being in the background, shouting, or a dog barking and all that kind of stuff made, I think, people appreciative of the work from home environment. But at least from my experience and what I've seen with, again, the people that I'm having these conversations with, suddenly I found myself in back to back calls all day long. And it was a struggle to even get out of my chair to go to the bathroom, let alone eat a meal or actually go for a walk like I was at the beginning of the pandemic, because we got into this habit of people are always available, or there's always the opportunity to sneak one more Zoom call in or one more Teams meeting onto the calendar because they have that half an hour free and it's not blocked. And I find myself doing this sometimes too, and I'm looking at people's calendars and I'm like, oh, there's a half an hour here I can grab. And then I've started, now that I'm realizing I'm feeling that pinch and I'm having these conversations, realizing like, oh no, I should maybe leave that half hour be on someone's calendar so that they can get up and move their body, or they can go to the bathroom in between their calls. And to your point, I think that's become the new norm of, we wake up, we open our computer, we start working, and maybe there's, half hour, 45 minutes, maybe it's 7:30 instead of 8 o'clock that you're opening your computer because you don't have that commute. And there's probably plenty of people who are going to be listening to me and be like, oh, this girl just doesn't know how to say no or balance her life. But I think that propensity to be going as fast as you can to prove that we can work remotely and prove that we can be productive remotely is starting to backfire a little. I think that the answer is somewhere probably in the middle of that hybrid work thing. But hybrid work, while half the people are still in that old mindset of scheduling all the time and having back-to-back meetings, then you're just working remote in your office with your door closed, having back-to-back meetings, and you're not getting any of the benefit of being back in front of people and back in those organic scenarios. And I was laughing a little when you were talking about the people that would walk in and say good morning or invite you to lunch, because that was me, and that was part of why I love my job. Is I love being in front of people and interacting with my coworkers and being able to take a client out to lunch and have them not be stressed out for that 1 hour that they're sitting and having a valuable conversation, to be worried about how much is piling up when they get back in front of their desk. And I think, I've had some of those conversations when I'm at a lunch meeting. Someone's like, oh my gosh, it was so hard for me to find a day that I felt like I could walk away for an hour. And it's like, oh, but we used to do that all the time. And this is a valuable interaction, and this is a valuable meeting. It's just over a lunch and not on a computer. So why do we feel guilty to still be having these valuable conversations just because they're not through this kind of mode of communication anymore? So I think it's an interesting dynamic that I'm seeing, and I will be curious to see how it plays out over the next 6 months to a year.
For sure. Now, working with businesses the way that you do, are you seeing the same pressure on organizations rather than the individual to also accelerate what they're doing? Or is it pressure on the people but not the business? What have you noticed?
I think there's a lot of pressure on businesses to show that COVID didn't slow them down, or that they could figure out a way to be productive throughout it. And I think that there's a lot of pressure just across the board to continue to push through and persevere and figure it out and make it work. I was thinking about this the other day. When the pandemic started, there was lots of messages of we're all in this together and we're all going through the same thing, and you're not alone if you're struggling. But now the narrative is kind of switched to, well, why can't we stay remote forever? And, not everybody's going through the same challenges anymore, because there are people that are back in the office full time. There's people that are trying to figure out how to work in a hybrid model. There's people that will stay remote forever. And I've actually had conversations with people where they've been told that that's their directive and they're not happy to hear it. So everybody is scattered all across this spectrum of what they're going through right now. And it's suddenly not this like, we're all in it together message. It's, this kind of divisive feeling, and like that, well, maybe I should be grateful I'm working from home and all the time. Why do I feel burnt out? Or, wow, this hybrid thing is difficult. Like, I wasn't anticipating what this is going to be like. But it isn't, there's no slowdown in sight from organizations. We've all figured out how to still keep business in the world working through the pandemic. And so there's no end in sight of when we're going to slow down or when capacity is going to adjust. And there's all sorts of other interesting dynamics going on in the world that kind of are ramifications of what's happened over the last year and a half with supply chain and inflation and all of these other things that are impacting what we're doing, that also make people's jobs more difficult than they used to be. And so it kind of feels isolating, because you're not going through the same thing that everyone else is going through all of a sudden.
That makes a lot of sense. I think culture plays a piece in this, or actually a strong piece. 3 quick examples. I was speaking to someone today in the steel industry, and he's a seller, and the rest of the company outside of pretty much sales had to be working to get everything done. It's an essential business. It's an essential industry for the United States, for the world. Their group, which could have worked from home, they chose to stay with the rest of the team to show solidarity. I've seen one CEO who just keeps stepping on the gas, and it's just how it is. And then I saw another leader who said, look, we can do this, but You have families, you have lives. But if we do this, let's make it a group commitment, and we're going to make it a limited amount of time. And I saw how that worked. So within those three examples, I'm seeing a lot where culture has a huge effect. Have you noticed anything like that on your end?
Yeah, I mean, from personal experience at Navient, there is a lot of, like, we have a very autonomous culture and a culture that's focused on work-life balance. And so I say this in the same vein of saying, like, I'm overworked on my Zoom meetings. But that being said, I was able to make the choice that I want to go back and I want to have an office and I want to be in the office and seeing people. There's other people that have chosen to come back a couple of days a week, and there's other people that are staying remote. And I can block time for appointments and that kind of thing on my calendar. And so that makes it much easier for me to block my travel, and my coworkers will respect that and not book over things. And, but to your point, the culture of everybody understanding where everyone else is on that journey, we're a 100-person company. It's a lot easier to keep up with what your coworkers are doing and what, like what their calendars look like and what you can and cannot schedule over, or how you can interact with those people, because we have that like tight knit culture where we understand kind of where our coworkers are on that journey. When you start getting to a company that's 2,000 employees, there's no way for you to keep up with that. And there's no way to have that connection at that level with every one of your colleagues. And you don't know why that person doesn't have their camera on, or why it might take them a little while to respond to an email the same way that you would in that tight-knit culture. So I think that does certainly impact what this journey looks like for people. And to your point, you mentioned leadership. I think leadership has a big part in this. And, we've made the effort to continue to instill our culture. So you mentioned you followed me on social media. Last week was Navient week for us. And so any of our coworkers that were comfortable with it from across the nation came into our headquarters office, and we had a week of activities and meetings and things like that. And we did stuff outside so that people could be comfortable. And we gave people designated workstations, even if they weren't from this area, so that they had a place to work that they felt comfortable and safe. But we did things like have a golf outing and go out to, have team lunches, and then had a company dinner outside of our office out in our, kind of outdoor working space. And it was so refreshing to see that. But before we had that, our CEO sent out a video to the entire company stressing that this is something that you only need to do if you're comfortable with it. And that we understand that everybody is going through a different journey right now, but that was from our leadership. And so I hope that everyone on our team felt comfortable making the decision that felt right for them. And there were some folks that stayed home, and there were other people that came for certain parts of the event and didn't come for others. And so we tried really hard to make it that kind of holistic experience for people, but also give the people like me who are desperate for that social interaction a little taste of what our culture is again. But again, it's so hard to do that when you get to these like large company sizes, because you almost have to make rules for one size fits all at that place in that avenue.
50% of the people that watch and listen to this show are women. And I see a lot of your posts are not just work, but they also talk about what it's like being a working mom and all the stuff that you have to go with, or that goes along with that. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what that looks like with trying to reintegrate, with moving faster, with all of everything that we've talked about so far?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a really good example. I have kind of today I made a post about being a working mom and what that means, and kind of playing off the idea of some of the stuff that I talk about from a change management perspective, because our family is about to go through a couple of big changes. I've got a 2-year-old daughter who, mark me insane, I decided the same week her big sister is going to kindergarten that I decided it was time to potty train. But their daycare is shut down tomorrow so that their teachers can get ready for the new school year, and they can work through all the logistics of kids moving off to kindergarten and other kids moving to new classrooms. So there's a lot of transition happening at our house, and I have tomorrow off. And like, thankfully, I have a husband who takes full ownership of our family as well. And we go back and forth in terms of who stays home during those scenarios. And this week is my turn. So I decided, you know what, we're going to be home for 3 days. Let's potty train. I made that decision, and then at the same time realized that there was 2 meetings on my calendar that I had booked for today because I didn't mark it off on my calendar that I'm going to kind of need to work around. And thankfully, they're all internal. So and I actually have some very wonderful clients that have been on calls with sick children in the background as well. But they're internal calls and they're over a nap time window. So I'm hoping I can kind of speak some of that in and get that done. But I have the flexibility to do that, which I realize I'm very, very fortunate to have. And, but there is a lot of balancing, whether you're a mom or a dad, if you've got kids that were school age over the last year, and suddenly they were in your house trying to learn. I was lucky enough that our daycare, after 2 months, kind of put some policies in place and opened back up their doors so that we could send our kids. But, for the first week of the pandemic, when everything shut down, our youngest learned how to walk that week. And trying to work and watch a kid who's taking their first steps, admittedly, it ended poorly in a couple of scenarios for that poor little girl. She also has a tendency to just kind of be a little uncoordinated and aggressive in her movements. So that's always a bad combination. But it was overwhelming. And I cannot imagine what it's been like for people that have been home with their kids throughout the entire pandemic, or for those people that might not be comfortable having their kids go back in the fall to school and have chosen for a virtual alternative. It's hard to have everything going on in the world and these big things happening and your kids hearing about what's going on and rules changing and having to wear masks and then not wear masks, or be able to go out and see people at restaurants and then all of a sudden not, and then be able to again. And all of those conversations and those things, I think, are stuff that we lose sight of sometimes when we're working with people. And again, when we were all in it together and it was very visible and it was in our faces, we understood all of those dynamics. But the further that we get away from the initial onset of this and the more divisions that we have in terms of how people are handling this and the decisions that we're making, I think it makes it, again, just this very weird thing to try and combat. And, when you have kids, they ask you all sorts of questions and you have to come up with your answers and think about how you want them to view the world. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now of whether your, morality being tied to things that have to do with masks or vaccinations and all of those kinds of things. And that affects our kids too. And so there's just so many layers that in the last 18 months, specifically being a working parent, that you're coming head on with. And there's no rule book or right answer of how you're managing any of it. And so you're just hoping that you're going about it the right way. At least with potty training, there's a book. I have a book that told me how to potty train in 3 days. There is no book that tells you how to parent through a pandemic while you're also trying to work full time from your computer. So I don't have all of the answers, but I think that's mostly what I post about, is the fact that it's hard and you just do your best. And, going back to my idea earlier, change management is basically what parenting is all about. So keeping open lines of communication and celebrating small wins and that kind of thing is kind of how I tie that into what I talk about on LinkedIn.
Maybe it's both leaders, the business itself, and the people that manage it, and employees, and the person-to-person connections through business or in life. Maybe that flexibility is something that maybe we're not all in it together, because we do have to go down our specific streams of life. But maybe the empathy of understanding that and being flexible is where the magic can happen. I was talking about being in the office and being frustrated by the lack of productivity and how much I enjoyed it when I started working from home. But as I've been in the office more, and then I work from home, my human children, they're good to go. But I'm a full-time dog dad and I've been doing it for years. But now it feels more frustrating to, oh, there's, what are we barking at? Oh, we got to do a vet trip. Oh, this thing, that thing, the other. And so maybe it's the flexibility, and humans love novelty. Tony Robbins talks about this. We like the new, and maybe the flexibility of going into the office when we need to, being able to work from home when we need to, businesses and teams being able to live through that flexibility will be even better and more productive and happier post pandemic than just working from home or just being in the office.
Yeah, I think the autonomy to make the decision on your own seems to be the overarching thing that I'm hearing a lot of people kind of cry for, in terms of, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. When we talk about change and transformation, we talk a lot about communication and how important communication is, and soliciting feedback and insights from your team, whether that's a digital transformation or something like a policy change at your organization. And one thing that I've seen a lot of companies do, and I've heard a lot of my friends socially talk about, like, well, our company sent out a survey, and everyone I've talked to filled out the survey and said that they want to be home full time. But now all of a sudden we have to go back a couple of days a week. And it's this idea that you were asked what your opinion is and you were given the false sense of autonomy to make that decision for yourself. And then somebody else came forward and said, actually, this is the directive that we're going to do, that I think is alienating people. And to your point, it's flexibility was coming and kind of coming down the pipeline before this. And now I think this is our lesson from the universe to start adopting flexibility in life, and understanding that everybody is on that different journey, pandemic or not. There's different things that play in someone's life, and someone may be taking care of an elderly parent and have extra appointments. Or when I was pregnant with my second daughter, I was at the doctor multiple times a week because I was a high-risk pregnancy. And thank God I had a company ahead of the curve that was comfortable with that flexibility back then, so that I could do that and I wasn't stressed about losing my job. But those things are, those are constants in life. Differences in our personal lives, everyone's going through something. And so as an organization, the more that you can do to help meet your employees where they are as people, and actually like give them the autonomy to make decisions where you can, I think is probably what's going to be the best path forward for people.
All right. So everybody listening that's a leader, serve your people. Don't be served by them. Sounds like the good way to go. All right. So perfect segue though. We're talking about moving faster, getting more stuff done, being more productive. You're in the robotic process automation space.
Yep.
I know you're a huge change management person. What is RPA? What's the value? Is there a perspective shift pre and post COVID?
So I'm going to take a half step back, because I think RPA is a part of it, but generally speaking, the work that I do is just focused on helping companies manage content and processes more effectively. And so RPA is probably the hottest buzzword in that industry, in terms of that and AI, in terms of how we're helping companies change the way that they work. But sometimes it's as simple as looking at what your process is and asking the question of, why are you doing something this way? And then you start to unpack layers of, well, that's the way it's always been. And then that person that's been there for 25 years says, well, that process started because we didn't get the mail until 2:00 back in the day. And then you start to realize that there's all sorts of things that you can do just to improve process at its basic level before you even bring in technology. But RPA specifically looks at, how do you help minimize the amount of manual repetitive tasks that people have to do. And so there's also other tools like workflow management or business process management that can help automate the flow of information through your organization to present the right content to somebody so that they can make a decision. So that's one way of automating processes. And then RPA is taking a look at bringing in a software robot, just like what it sounds like. That's what the robotic part of or RPA is. And it's bringing in that robot to show them how these repetitive tasks are done day in and day out. So these aren't things that require decision making. These aren't things that require a human to interact with the process. So what we can do is we can essentially configure these bots to follow the process that a human would while they're clicking around to do this type of work, and then have it be automated without that person having to be involved in the process anymore. So a couple of examples of like what that might be. Some people that are watching may be familiar with like going through a process and having information in one system, but needing that information to be populated in the other, and not having a great way to integrate those tools. RPA can be a way to kind of work around maybe a lack of an API integration or ways for those tools to talk with one another. And rather than having somebody copy and paste something from one field over here and bring it over here and do that 5 times in a process, you can train the bot how to do that, because the bot can see all of the clicks and what's happening on the screen and replicate that process without a person in the middle. A lot of really large batch processes can be done with RPA in the background. So you can have these bots do things in, a fraction of a second that would take us a little, I'm shaking the table, sorry. But you can have the bots do things in a fraction of a second than what it would take a human to do that. Another really great example of how RPA can be less involved in just these large batch manual processes that don't involve people, we can also use them to help people be more effective at their jobs. So a great example of this is if someone's working in a call center and they get a call from a customer, and that customer starts talking to them and they need information and they need to pull up screens so that they understand what that person's file looks like within their system, and they need to understand what's that document that they're talking about that they got sent in the mail, and all of this different information that they need to be able to help solve that customer service inquiry that's happening on the phone. We can use bots to go and pull up those screens and take that person's client number and go look up their record and bring that forward so that the person that's having the conversation can focus on the empathy and the human part of that interaction, rather than halfway listening to you while they're going and searching for that information. And so that's more of a augmentation of how the human is doing their job. And then there's those other places where we can bring in RPA to replace manual intervention entirely. And so you asked the question of like, how has the perception of this changed over the last 18 months? I would say any company that was considering transformation in some flavor, form, or fashion before this has probably taken steps to start turning their strategy into a reality. And anybody that thought that they didn't need to go through a transformation and that they were good and efficient and fine the way that they were, have now realized all the holes that have been poked in that theory over the last 18 months while they've been trying to figure out, can we go remote? Okay, now we're remote, which ones of our processes broke? And like that process has probably helped most companies, if not all companies, realize that this isn't just something they're being told they need to do, but it is actually a reality of what they need to start building into their business strategy.
So if you're looking at a market and you have that laggard who, it's fine, we're making money and this is how we've always done it. And then these other companies are accelerating digital transformation. Is it the benefits that those companies that are moving forward, that they're reaping, that are forcing the laggard company to move? What's unblocking that really calcified company from actually and getting them to move?
I think there is pressure more from kind of what you were saying, those companies that are moving forward, they're getting farther and farther ahead. And as those companies get further and further ahead, and this isn't even industry specific. So when you look at companies like Amazon and Apple, they are changing the customer perception of what good is for everyone and every industry. And the farther along that these big companies get in changing our perception of the way that the world should work, the farther these companies that haven't done anything are falling behind. So this idea of kind of Amazon and like, I want it instantly and I want to be able to track things and I want to know where that is. Well, that's part of why things like Uber came up and why things like DoorDash all of a sudden have these apps where you can track where your food is on the way to your house. It wasn't because anybody was like upset that delivery drivers, were not meeting their expectations in comparison to other delivery drivers. It was that we've suddenly got the understanding that we should be able to track and measure and understand what's going on in the background of all of our processes. And so it's not even competition against your own industry and what everybody in your industry is doing. It's how tolerant your customers are to your outdated processes that I think are starting to drive some of those laggards to realize they need to change.
And so you just need one company that comes in and starts meeting those new heightened expectations, and that changes the whole game.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that you said, which I found interesting, I led with RPA, but you backed it up to we have to look at the processes. Mm-hmm. And I can see where that is important for a small company, as well as a huge company, although the bigger company is going to be a bigger lift to figure that out. Mm-hmm. How often should, because I mean, there's time, there's cost, there's money. How often should a company revisit those processes so that they look at it, they get some automation in place, they figure it out, things are going, but I mean, right, then they mature and we can look for new efficiencies. Is it a consistent process or is it a every once in a while process?
I think it's the answer of like in the ideal world is that it's continuous improvement across the board. And so you mentioned the idea of some of these bigger companies, and a big trend that we're seeing across the board in big and even mid-size and small companies is that they're starting to bring process experts in-house. And the reason for that is they want those process experts to help them identify where their biggest opportunity for change is. And so chances are, unless it's an incredibly high volume, high revenue part of your business, you're not going to be continuously making changes to one process all over the place. But you may be having, kind of this SWAT team, so to speak, that focuses on process improvement, working with different departments and focusing on kind of smaller buckets of where, okay, let's take a look at this process and let's improve it. And then I haven't met a company that necessarily has a cadence of, oh, we looked at this process 2 years ago, so we're going to come back to it immediately, and come back to it because our 2-year timer is hit. But it's more, how does the process change? How do the impacts on the outside of that process, things like customer experience. If you have customers that are calling you all of a sudden and saying like, Robert, you're not meeting my expectation, I need X, Y, and Z from you, that's likely going to be the catalyst for you to relook at your process, assuming that it's not really outdated and doesn't have any sort of efficiencies built into it. So there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer in terms of how often that needs to be happening, but you can't just leave a solution in place for 10 years and hope that it's still doing as good of a job or as an effective of a job as it was when you initially put it in place. Part of that is technology advances, so you can get incremental benefits from improving your technology, but just to like what you were saying, your process is likely going to change over those 10 years because nothing is static in life. So there's going to be these outside influences that impact the way that your process works. And so now we've reached the point where technology for the most part is, if you're using solution suites that you're buying, they're typically, there's an upgrade cadence. And so a lot of times companies won't go more than 2 years behind before they upgrade a solution. Or if they do, they start to hear watch the pitchforks come out with the business because they're tired of interacting with that. But some of those things like software improvements and upgrades are going to drive your business to move forward. And then again, it's going to be those outside influences of changes that kind of dictate when and where you bring in those process reviews over time.
I wonder if there's going to be, so if people are starting to bring in, whether it's through hired help as an agency for experts, or if you do it internally and you need process experts to keep you going, change management experts. Going back to the earlier part of the conversation, I wonder if it'll become a thing with some sort of mental health or psychology experts, that as we're becoming more efficient and we push humans to adapt, or the pressure, which has been a theme on this show, where how technology is increasing faster and faster, and that there's a psychological impact on the individual and society. I wonder if that will become a need as well. So not only do we create more efficient systems and healthier systems, but maybe we're going to have to do that with the human because we're moving so quickly.
So that's part of the reason that I am as fascinated by change management as I am. And I kind of started smirking when you brought up the idea of like psychology and bringing psychology into it, because I actually, so you follow me on LinkedIn, I do a weekly series. And this week, actually, I posted an interview with a gentleman named David, and he has a PhD. And I don't want to fully go into exactly without having it in front of me, but it is a psychology related PhD. And he's found a home for himself helping organizations manage change and manage specifically digital implementations or digital solutions, because there is so much change that comes along with it. And so during our conversation, we talked about, what types of cognitive biases can get in your way when you're doing a change. And then kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, what does cognitive load have to do with an employee's ability to manage change and take it on and be embracing of it? Because the last 18 months, we have all had so much on our mind, and there's so much that's kind of like sinking in around us and change, that you throw another thing on the back of the camel and it's going to, that straw is going to break that camel's back. And so one of the things that David mentioned during our interview is that your brain is almost like it's a fixed vessel, and you can only pour so much water into that fixed vessel before it starts to overflow. And so one of the things that he talked about in the interview is that you have to take that cognitive load into consideration while you're managing change within your organization, or you won't be successful. And so again, he has helped manage some pretty large brands in terms of their transformations. And he had some really wonderful statistics in terms of what types of business outcomes came from taking the time to pay attention to the psychological impact that it's having on your employees, and how you manage counteracting cognitive bias, and how you meet your employees where they're at with their current cognitive load to help support that. And so it's a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about, because it doesn't matter what solution you're bringing in. I sell software for a living. It doesn't matter if you buy my software solution and it's in the top of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. That means nothing if your team doesn't adopt it. I can't do anything for you if your team chooses not to use the solution. And so that's part of why, I started at Navient. And one of the first things that my boss told me was, and his name is Mark Miller, I've tagged him in a number of posts when I'm talking about this, but one of the first things that he told me was, the technology is the easy part. It's the people that are the hard part. And it's getting people on board with the change. It's getting people to change the way that they're working. And that is really the secret sauce. And the fact that we pay attention to that and we help our customers manage that process, that's why we find more success with our implementations, because we're not bringing in a solution that's out of the box, giving it to you and walking away. We're working through that process with you. And over time, I've realized that that is what I am super, super passionate about. I like my software. I think it does great things for people, but it's actually changing the way that people work and improving their jobs and hopefully their lives by bringing technology into the process that I am super passionate about.
That makes so much sense. So often we're shoehorning people into the technology rather than adapting the technology to benefit the people. And the people are the ones that keep the organization going. So doing it that way. And this really expands. I had a conversation last week. I was talking to a business owner, and she said that when she's thinking about consultants or growing the business in different ways to achieve those goals, that it's exhausting because it's not only, hey, I want this goal, but then how do I get it done? How many more hours is it going to require of me? How much more do I need to learn when the mind is already overflowing with that water and the vessel is done? And what you just said really has me even more empathetic towards her position, and being able to meet those psychological needs when discussing solutions for the person rather than just 1 + 1 = 2. Here's the software solution. It's really cool that you're doing that.
Well, there is a certain amount of gentle nudging that sometimes needs to come along with that. And that's part of helping combat, you mentioned this idea of like, well, how much extra work is this going to give to me? Or how much is this going to add to my plate when I'm already feeling overwhelmed? And part of change management and her role, I would guess, is helping shift that perspective from it may add 2 hours a week for you right now, but the ultimate goal is to reduce 4 hours a week for you. Or the ultimate goal is to get rid of this part of your job that you really, really hate. And so I don't want to say that we can't nudge people towards a different outcome or nudge people towards adopting technology. But you do have to meet them where they're at and help them get to that eventual outcome in their mind. And so one of the things that I talk a lot about when I talk about change is I kind of break it down into like 3 categories, which is an oversimplification to the highest extent. But I think it helps people kind of bucket out how you need to manage that. And the first part of it is meeting your employees where they're at, helping them understand why transformation is an organizational goal, and then getting them to the point where they understand what's in it for them. Because as an individual person, we're all kind of selfish, and evolutionarily, we're meant to look out for ourselves. And there's a reason that my 2-year-old will fight with her sister about something being hers and mine. And we go through that phase because that's how our brains work, and that's okay. But you, as a person, as a change agent or a leader within your organization, have to be able to make that jump from why is this a goal that everybody needs to care about to what is your individual goal and how is it going to improve your life. And then you're going to help flip that perspective and help them focus on making the solution what's going to be impactful for the organization, because they are going to have something that like what's in it for me statement in their mind as well.
So it's multi-level. It's what's the value to the business, and at the individual level, you need to be able to narrate that story from both perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. I truly appreciate you taking a second time to talk with me today. It was fun. The first time we spoke, I said at the end of the call that I was looking forward to, definitely wanted to do another one. I'm almost grateful that the file disappeared, so we were able to do this again. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds great. Have a wonderful day, everyone.